Well, welcome everybody to the USINPAC Presidential Dialogue Series. USINPAC is a bipartisan organization representing 3 million Indian Americans throughout the United States and has been engaging both Democratic and Republican presidential candidates since 2004. Just as we did in 2004, 2008, and 2012, in 2016 we're going to be engaging with Democratic and Republican presidential candidates. And today's session is with the campaign of Ms. Carly Fiorina, who's represented by Sarah Isker Flores. Now, you may be wondering why USINPAC has been so successful for now our fourth presidential election cycle with engaging presidential campaigns. It's because these campaigns recognize that Indian Americans have a significant population in key caucus and primary states, and these states are necessary for either party for any candidate to become the representative, the nominee of their either Republican or presidential or Democratic party. Now, based on the 2010 census, and surely our numbers have increased, Iowa has over 11,000 Indian American voters. In fact, it also has candidates who are Indian American who have run at the state level and the federal level, and also have even won at the state level. New Hampshire has over 8,000. South Carolina over 15,000. Nevada 11,000. And it goes on and on for all these key states. And then even in the general election, Virginia has over 100,000, same with Florida, over 125,000. So, we're kind of been fortunate with having strong populations in these key states. Now, I'd like to introduce Sarah from Carlys' campaign. Sarah, could you please tell us a bit about yourself and also about the campaign generally?
Sure. My name is Sarah Isker Flores. I'm the Deputy Campaign Manager for Carly Fiorina. I've been with Carly, this is basically my year anniversary. So been with her since the beginning of the sort of campaign season. My portfolio includes communication, policy, anything under the sun really. So all questions are fair game, I guess, I'm afraid to say. I travel with Carly a lot on the road, obviously, as you've figured out and guessed. A lot of time in Iowa, a lot of time in New Hampshire, but we're having a lot of fun. I think that Carly's message is really resonating. People are sick of people from the political class making big promises, big talk, but then no one can ever seem to solve these problems, and so every 4 years we talk about the same issues and nothing gets done. So what Carly's message is that it's time to get it done. It's time to take our country back and actually say what our priorities are and move forward on those.
Great.
And there's
thank you. Well, excellent. Now we'll move on to questions which were posed by our membership throughout the country, including these key states. The first one will be asked by Sanjay Puri, who's the chairman and founder of USINPAC over 10 years ago, back in 2004. Sanjay?
For the Fiorina campaign for participating in this, and thanks Manish for moderating this panel. This is very, very important. As he said, Indian Americans play a disproportionate role, not just in the key states, but in the role that they have. They are physicians, they are teachers, they run hotels, motels, so they have a tremendous touch point with a lot of members of the community. And with Carly's background in Silicon Valley, this is a question that's has come in from a lot of entrepreneurs. I myself am an entrepreneur. A lot of Indian Americans are entrepreneurs. The estimates are maybe about 15% or so of Silicon Valley startups are owned by Indian American or started by them. Can you discuss how a Fiorina presidency would impact entrepreneurs, especially, people always talk about small business being the backbone of this country. Every 4 years we hear this in the presidential campaign, but maybe you can talk about her background, from coming from the bottom up. How is it going to impact small business and entrepreneurship, Sarah?
Absolutely. I think that question sort of summarizes the most important conversation we're having as a country right now and in this primary, which is this economy hasn't really been working for anyone except the big, the powerful, the wealthy, while everyone else, entrepreneurs of every shade, whether you're starting a business or just have an idea, are intimidated or crushed by what's going on. So, to back up a little, Carly started as a secretary in a 9-person real estate firm, and from there she then moved to AT&T, where she started as sort of a low-rung salesperson, and she worked her way up to be the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. And what she'll tell you is that what Hewlett-Packard, it was a $90 billion company. They could hire the lobbyists, the accountants, the lawyers to battle with Washington, to battle the regulations or the tax code or anything else that got in their way. They did, and they succeeded. But the 9-person real estate firm couldn't. They don't have accountants and lawyers and lobbyists. And so what ends up happening is that these entrepreneurs and these new businesses actually create 2/3 of the jobs in this country. But what we're doing is making it harder for them and easier for the Hewlett-Packards of the world or any large corporation who can afford to deal with all of the complexity. Basically, complexity favors those already in business, and simplicity favors those who are trying to disrupt whatever group they're trying to break into. And so I think what Carly would say is there's a lot of things we have to do. One is tackle the large regulations, the large regulatory schemes that are hurting every industry. Obamacare is one example. I hope we'll get to healthcare later. But setting aside even those, something so profound, which is the tax code. We have a 73,000-page tax code. Well, if it's 73,000 pages and you're thinking of starting your business, and with high corporate tax rates and thousands of pages, how can you possibly understand what's going on? And if you can't understand it, it can't possibly be fair. So what Carly has said is that she wants to lower that 73,000 pages to about 3 pages. And that means closing every loophole and lowering every rate, including the corporate rate as well. So I'm sure we'll get into more of that in other questions. But the punchline is the big, the powerful, and the wealthy are favored by complexity. So if it's not simple, it's not fair to everyone. And so she would simplify a lot of these regulatory schemes and, most importantly, the tax code.
Great, thank you.
And actually, so you mentioned healthcare and questions about that. Let's move on to a healthcare question from Dolly Kapoor, who's actually on the board of directors for a Chamber of Commerce, an Indian American Chamber of Commerce that's in Nevada.
Oh, great.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to get more details on what Fiorina campaign is thinking in future. And my question is just about what you mentioned, healthcare. So as we know that about 10% of the physicians are Indian Americans in US, and Nevada actually holds a lot of population of physicians. And when I meet them and when we discuss with them, they want to know what would a Fiorina campaign do for the healthcare industry, especially when, with respect to medical malpractices, when most of the physicians actually favor cap on medical malpractices liability. So how could you give us some details on what the plan is of the Fiorina campaign in terms of healthcare?
Sure. Great question, obviously, and love coming to Nevada as often as we do, especially right now when it's really cold everywhere. So I hope you're keeping it warm, because I'm going to be there in about 2 weeks.
Yes. Let us know if you need any help. We'll be there to help you out.
Oh, thank you. I'm from Texas originally, so really just warmth is what I need. I don't do well in cold temperatures. So New Hampshire and Iowa, right? But to your question, so tort reform in general and medical malpractice form specifically are hugely important. And I know that a lot of states are tackling this. I mentioned I'm from Texas. Texas has done a lot of work tackling this at the state level. Not only is Carly supportive of that, there are things that the federal government can do to try to rein in tort reform, or rather frivolous lawsuits through tort reform as well, and she is hugely supportive of that. And there's a variety of things that you can do. But on the healthcare industry specifically, and with Obamacare, it's worth diving in some other areas. Let me start with Obamacare. Carly is in favor of repealing Obamacare and moving to something that we've never actually tried in the healthcare industry, which is competition across states. Healthcare in this country, and the insurance companies in particular, have always been in a highly regulated oligopoly, for lack of a better word, where you've never really been able to shop for insurance nationwide. They've never really had to compete for your business. So Representative Price has a plan like this. Governor Walker had a plan for this as well. The point being that we don't lack for good ideas of how to replace Obamacare at this point. We lack for the political will to get it done. She is a breast cancer survivor herself, so there are some things that we absolutely need to bear in mind. Pre-existing conditions. Carly is basically a walking, talking pre-existing condition to any insurance company. And there's ways that we can deal with that as well. We can have, before Obamacare, it was working well until Obamacare kind of came in and flushed it all out. Basically what you had with Obamacare was a good idea. Access for health care, no pre-existing conditions. Everyone agrees with these goals. But the way they did it, with more regulation and less competition, did exactly what you'd suspect. A bunch of consolidation of insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, hospitals are closing down, and what that does is actually reduce access and increase cost. So by repealing Obamacare, we fix a lot of those problems. However, second to that is transparency. You don't know whether the hospital down the street has a higher success rate. You don't know what your actual procedure costs ahead of time. You can't shop for those things. So one of the few regulations that Carly has been a proponent of is more transparency from hospitals and administrators in terms of what things cost and what the success rates are at that hospital. And, I know this doesn't sound like it's related to medical malpractice, and in some sense it isn't, but what we've found in other areas is the more transparency you have and the more consumers have information, that helps the entire industry. And it lowers that unforeseen where they're surprised at the end about an outcome. So I think you do tackle tort reform at the federal level. You support states that are doing important work. So many of these are state issues. You repeal Obamacare, and you create more transparency for individuals so that competitiveness can increase access and drive prices down at the most local level, which is, what hospital do I go to right now?
Well, thanks, Sarah. That's very helpful and quite thorough, so we really appreciate that. I think our next question is from Sanjay, and we've had 2 questions on domestic issues, and now I think we're going to move on to some foreign policy questions. Sanjay?
Yeah, thanks, Manish. Sarah, once we reached out to the community in terms of doing this dialogue with Carly, a lot of the concerns that have been coming in on the issue of terrorism. And so this question really talks about the role of India. As you know, India is close to a lot of our members. India has the 2nd largest population of Muslims in the world after Indonesia. And generally, it's been a role model in terms of multiple religions living in a secular manner. Despite being in a tough neighborhood like with Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh, which have had serious problems with Islamic terrorism. What are the thoughts of the campaign on the role of India and U.S. working together on this issue of terrorism, whether it's working against groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or others? Sarah?
Great question. Obviously, foreign policy and terrorism in particular on many people's minds. I think that it's fair to say that a lot of Americans right now are angry at how this president has handled these issues over his entire terms in office. Let me back up by Carly's experience. Carly was obviously HP, first of all, did business in 170 countries when Carly left. So she is extremely well acquainted with many of the world leaders on the stage today and previously. She has traveled the world extensively. She probably has more foreign policy experience than anyone else running, with the possible exception of Hillary Clinton. When she left HP, she became the head of the External Advisory Board of the Central Intelligence Agency. She's advised the NSA, the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, Secretaries of State, which is all to say she's held the highest security clearances. She understands these problems at a very technical and specific level. What's interesting is after some of that, she then became the chairman of an organization called Opportunity International. And so in January of this year, so 12 months ago, she actually was in India for a week, which is a little unusual for a budding presidential candidate. It was before she announced. But she spent a week in India talking about foreign policy as well as what Opportunity International does, which is microfinance loans in some of the most impoverished areas of the world, and particularly to women. So it was a great trip. There's lots of pictures on her Facebook page. He's a big fan of India, both as a political powerhouse in the region, but also as an opportunity. So to answer your question very specifically, he believes that our allies, America's allies, must know that America's friendship means something. We all need to tackle ISIS together. We all have a stake in that. But when our enemies and our adversaries, or our growing adversaries, see America's alliances weakening, or America sort of brushing off some of our allies internationally, what they see is, oh, America's friendship doesn't mean much anymore. And so I read an article today actually about the Taliban, that the Taliban in Afghanistan is the strongest it's been since 2001. That obviously is a huge problem for the world. It's a huge problem in the region. And that is up to allies of the US, allies of India, to come together, decide what needs to be done, and take action. When it comes to ISIS, many of the allies in the region also want to defeat ISIS. They've asked for specific things, bombs, materiel. They have every interest in defeating this as well. It is a cancer in that area. But the U.S. instead has sat by saying that ISIS is a JV team, that we don't have a strategy. It has shown weakness from this president, and it has removed America from the leadership business worldwide. So the first thing to do is put America back in a position of leadership in the world, reassure our allies, and tell our adversaries that their time is up.
That's great. Thanks, Sarah. I think, Sonia, you might have a follow-up question on that about Prime Minister Modi of India's visit to Pakistan recently.
Yeah, Sarah, this was also a very much requested question that has come in from around the country. Prime Minister Modi made an unannounced visit a couple of days ago to Pakistan when he was in Afghanistan. And the issue that a lot of Indian Americans want to know is what is Carlys' position on the US-India relationship, as well as the relationship between US-India and US-Pakistan relationship, because obviously a lot of aid has been going to Pakistan from the United States for the past decade or more, and some of it ends up in the wrong hands. So I think that's a question that concerns a lot of Indian Americans.
And rightly so. You know, Carly recently was discussing foreign aid. I know that's not your entire question, but you know, we have such an opportunity for private sector, whether it's Opportunity International or there's many other organizations like that, to provide the actual assistance on the ground that we claim to be providing foreign aid for. And so working through those organizations rather than handing money over, as you said, which can so easily fall into the wrong hands. And it's not just Pakistan. I mean, my goodness, look at Africa as well. As a continent, and so many of those countries that we try to give aid to falls into the wrong hands. There are better ways to do that through the private sector and through public-private partnerships. So to answer that specific part of your question, Carly has also given a speech on America's relationship with China in the region, which affects, I think, a much broader scope than simply their most immediate neighbors. But obviously it brings in Russia, it brings in India, and China has an interest in Pakistan as well. And so, again, the key is building those alliances. India is one of America's strongest allies, and having those discussions in terms of being a leader, and America being a leader both in the region and in the world, and asking, what do you need? What would actually be helpful, not simply retreating back and allowing some of these regional powers, whether it's China or the Taliban in Afghanistan, to take hold, and then we end up with an ISIS problem all over again.
Thanks, Sarah. And we're going to turn from sort of international foreign policy issues to international economic policies that affect the United States and India. So this is actually a question from a leading financial and pharmaceutical executive by the name of Mac Jadekar. He was wondering, what are your thoughts on promoting pharmaceutical innovation in research and development within the United States so that, among other benefits, pharmaceutical companies may stay away from taking advantage of tax inversions by shifting company headquarters to foreign countries that might have a more favorable corporate tax structure than the United States?
Well, this is true in so many industries where the tax code favors one over another, favors a current power over a disrupting entry into that industry. Inversions are obviously a very specific issue, but it goes to the whole problem, which is a 73,000-page tax code. So when you move that down to a 3-page tax code, when you shut down every loophole and every subsidy or favoritism or anything else, you solve so much of this problem. When everyone is treated fairly across the board, you shut down so many of the, well, if you build in this, then you have to build in this, and then we want this, and we want this, and that's where you get into the lobbyists and the accountants and the lawyers in order to make that work. And inevitably, despite best intentions, that will always favor the big, the powerful, and the well-connected, because they can actually hire the lobbyists to do it. So the answer is simplicity. Move down to a 3-page tax code, and that includes the corporate tax code as well. And when you shut down those loopholes, it levels the playing field for everyone entering, and it also levels the playing field for those companies who are used to getting subsidies, special benefits, and privileges from a 73,000-page tax code that they've built into it.
Okay. Well, thank you. Now we're going to turn to a new issue that we want to discuss, immigration. And we'll turn to Vic Chauhan, who's actually in Virginia, which in the general election will be very critical. I think wherever Virginia went in the last few is Vic, are you there?
Yes, hi Manish. Hi Sarah, thanks for your time.
Hi.
So we're going to talk about immigration. We know this was in a back burner until the Donald put it back front and center. So we'd like to know what is Fiorina's policies regarding immigration, regarding the 11 million refugees, the wall, and Indian Americans are a large immigrant community, and they're also rightly concerned about it.
Sure. Well, a few things. One, with all due respect to the Donald, of course, immigration isn't a new topic for us. Every 4 years we talk about immigration, and it just never seems to change. For 25 years we've talked about how the border's insecure, but no one's actually done anything to secure it. So first, Carly would secure the borders. Second, she would drastically change the legal immigration system to make that a simple and fair system for those trying to enter the country. We don't need 16 visa programs. That makes no sense, and it makes it very difficult for those trying to get in. You look at the HB1 visa program, which is supposed to help high-skilled workers, and then we see that companies are abusing that system. One bill that's out there, it would actually require that if you want to have high-skilled workers, they need to have the degree to go with it, and you have to pay them commensurate with that degree, which would prevent abuse of that system. But imagine if we just fixed the entire legal immigration system so that we didn't have 16 programs, each with their own special set of rules. And last, to your point about those who are here illegally, this is Carly's view. It's certainly mine as well. And I think a lot of people whose parents or grandparents immigrated here or who immigrated here themselves, which is, if your first act in coming to this country was breaking our laws, then you can't become a citizen. We believe, Carly believes, that maybe you can earn some sort of legal status to work down the way. Deporting 11 million people is impractical in a lot of respects, but you can't be a citizen. There are too many people who waited in line, too many people who did make their way through that legal immigration system to abide by our laws. So if you came here illegally, you don't get citizenship. That we can't reward that kind of behavior. But none of that can happen until we actually secure the border and prevent the problem from simply reoccurring down the road.
Great. No, thanks, Sarah. That's really helpful. And our next question actually comes in from New Hampshire. It's regarding education. And this member of USINPAC asked, Indian Americans place a strong emphasis on education, and sort of the immigrant community that came to the country came with an education, most of them, and really instilled that upon the next generation, which I think that's where I can say from my perspective, that's where I saw a lot of parents being involved in the political sector, where they'd be attending parent-teacher conferences or attending, meeting with teachers, getting involved in school board elections, things of that sort. So, this next question is just that we place a strong emphasis on education, and could you discuss how if you're in a presidency would affect issues with respect to education?
Absolutely, and I apologize for moving around. I just wanted to make very, very sure that I was not going to lose power.
Oh, no problem. No problem. And actually, I'll give you a little bit more detail, as you said. I can tell you from, I grew up in New Hampshire, and our community, the way it's increased is that I would say our graduating high school class maybe had about 10 out of 600 that are Indian American. Now it's probably upwards of 100 out of 600. And you go to any parent-teacher conference or any school board meeting, and it's just filled with Indian Americans there. So that's something at a very grassroots level in your states, these early primary states, that people are really focusing on that issue.
Well, I think that is, let's divide this up into primary education and higher education, starting with higher education, which is a door for so many immigrant communities, for their children and for the next generation to get the American dream, that next job, whatever that may mean. Higher education in this country has, I don't know what the right term is here, floundered. Student loan debt is through the roof because the federal government more or less nationalized the student loan industry. The rates are through the roof because it's actually the federal government controlling so much of it. And a lot of kids don't know that these days, and so you see these protests, and no one's telling them the truth, which is that actually deregulating this system and allowing businesses to compete for loans will hugely help. Not to mention that then those loans lead to inflation in the tuition to begin with. So it is a vicious cycle when it comes to higher education. Another piece of this is, again, transparency. Letting these parents, these kids, know what's going on at these schools, what majors lead to what, and the accreditation system as a whole. The accreditation system is a huge mess. I went to law school, and in order to be an accredited law school, you had to have X number of volumes in your library, even though none of us went to the library. That's what LexisNexis is for. So, forcing a law school to carry, I forget, I mean, it's some absurd number of books, is sort of beside the point entirely. So we can fix the accreditation system, we can fix transparency, and we can fix the student loan industry, which should make higher education much more accessible, much cheaper, and allow, again, immigrant communities that are just coming now to experience the same benefits of America's education system that so many past generations of immigrant communities have experienced in the past. It is the key to the American dream. Now, for primary education and secondary, Common Core, these federal programs, the Department of Education spends more and more every year, and our education system gets worse. The public schools in this country are deteriorating while we pour more taxpayer dollars into it because of things like Common Core. So Carly would repeal all of those nationalized mandates, return power to these local communities which actually know what the curriculum needs to be, what their kids need to thrive, and choice. Choice is so important at every level, but when a parent has a choice, their child has a chance. So encouraging school choice, these programs that allow students to leave a failing public school and attend, whether it's a public school or a private school, a better school is where sort of the whole kit and caboodle lies. So hugely important, getting rid of those federal mandates, lessening the power of the federal government in local education, and encouraging school choice in communities and at the state level as well.
So have you seen, I guess on the campaign trail, have you met a lot of people who are sending their kids to charter schools and talking about the differences between? Have you seen a significant difference between the education they receive in a charter school and in a, I guess, in public school or non-charter school?
Well, and it's funny, you know, the hope would be that there actually wouldn't be much. That when you take your kid and put them in a charter school, it's because that public school was failing. If your kid's in a public school, hopefully it's a good public school, and that's why you've kept your kid there. So the hope is that, in fact, everyone's sort of getting the education that their kid needs. But certainly the charter school success story is in New Orleans, where I believe it's something like 90% of African American students in New Orleans now use the scholarship program to attend their non sort of public local school. And it's been just wildly successful. The reading rates, the graduation rates, all have skyrocketed under that. At the same time, the Department of Justice under this administration sued them to shut it down. So it tells you where this administration's interests are. They're with the teachers' unions and not the students. Something similar happened in California where the students actually sued the teachers' union, and they won. And again, Democrats backed the teachers' union instead of the students who filed a lawsuit, which, first of all, is pretty impressive, and I'd probably give them their degree just for managing that whole system.
Well, that's excellent. Actually, we're going to go back to Dolly, who has a question about inter-American women. Dolly?
Thanks, Manish. Sarah, I'm loving it. I'm loving the conversation here. I have a very interesting question for you. So as a small business owner myself, I look up to many successful women entrepreneurs. And Carly recently had a very interesting response to which women should be on the $20 bill. And it received a lot of positive reviews from the media. Could you please reiterate her response and describe why did she give such a response and what is your understanding of that?
Sure. You know, just as some background, when you're staff at these debates, and at that debate in particular, you know, we're not sitting in the audience. We have to watch it on TV like you do. And so I was sitting in this trailer, and when that question came through, I was like, I do not know what the answer to this is. That's when you're so grateful to work for the smartest candidate in the room and in the field. And Carly is fantastic. Her conservative instincts are always right, and it's such a pleasure to work for such a strong, thoughtful, powerful woman in this race. But to answer your question, so what Carly said was, who cares, basically? It's a token to put a woman on the $20 bill instead of actually doing something for women in this country, which is so often the liberal response to these sort of problems that we have. And so Carly's given a great speech on feminism in this country and sort of the capture of feminism by the far left as a political ideology instead of actually trying to further the efforts of women in this country. But what Carly would tell you is that we have to foster meritocracies. When she was at HP, by the time she left, half of her reports were female, not because she sought to hire women, but because she actually sought to create meritocracies and to look past who you golf with to hire, but rather who's available and interview those people and then pick the best one. It's something we don't have in the federal government. Federal government is time in grade, meaning how long you've been there, how many days you've put into that job, not how good a job you've done. And so that hurts women. Women leave to take care of their parents. They leave to take care of children. They leave the workforce for a few years, and then when they come back, they're disadvantaged. Instead of saying, actually, she has an enormous amount of experience, and she does fantastic work, and in 1 hour, she can do what it takes maybe someone else 3 hours to do. We're going to reward that and promote that because that's a meritocracy. And so Carly would promote meritocracies within the federal government and encourage private sector businesses to do the same, because that's how you will actually get to equal pay, to more women in these positions. It's not by putting one on the $20 bill.
Well, that's great. And so that's really interesting when you talk about the meritocracy and how Carly went about hiring and promoting employees at her companies. What about, would those kind of same principles apply to a cabinet as well? Or how would she go about assembling a cabinet, and what would it look like?
Boy, I'd hate to get ahead of Carly on this question. I'm sure she has many interesting thoughts on it, and I'm sorry that she can't be here to join you to answer this one herself. I think that Carly would look outside your traditional spheres for a lot of cabinet positions. There are very talented people in this country doing innovative things. You know, part of that is because she comes from Silicon Valley, one of the most innovative sectors of our economy. She sees what people can do when you remove the barrier. So yes, I think that you'd see some interesting choices in her cabinet positions. But I don't want to get ahead of her with names.
Oh, sure, no worries. Actually, we'll go to Sanjay with a question about, we've really focused on Carly's views, but want to get a feel for how she compares to others. Sanjay?
Thanks, Manish. And Sarah, this is more to let members of our community across the country, 3 million plus people know. How would you compare or contrast or point out some key differences between Carly and other candidates running for office, whether it's in the Republican side or the Democratic side? If you can tell our listeners what that would be.
Absolutely. Well, I think with all due respect to everyone running, Carly is the only person who actually has a track record of challenging bureaucracies and challenging the status quo and getting results. What you see from a lot of candidates are 10-point plans to solve whatever problem, and they've got a lot of policy experts on their teams who can rattle off facts and figures. But as I've said before, every 4 years we talk about these problems and it never gets done. So what we need to look at is not who's got the best idea. We don't lack for good ideas in the conservative movement. We have think tanks full of brilliant minds who have those ideas. We need someone who will actually get it done. And what we've seen, both Democrats and Republicans alike, is that the political class is unable to get this done. They're not actually leaders. They're followers. And they favor the big, the powerful, the wealthy, because that's where their bread is buttered, so to speak. So in this field, you have some people who've never made an executive decision in their life, or who haven't had the sort of foreign policy experience that Carly has, the national security credentials that she has, whatever it is. But again, the most fundamental aspect is whatever your issue is, whatever your problem is, whatever you think the solution is, someone from the political class isn't going to get it done. They've shown that over and over again. So we need an outsider, and we need one who's credible and who actually has a track record of challenging these bureaucracies. As a side note, one of my favorite stories about Carly's tenure at HP is that when she came in, and forgive me because I'm probably going to get the numbers wrong, she knows better than I do, but there were something like 87 different units within HP. Each one had their own CFO, their own president, their own everything, their own sales, marketing, etc. And it was all so siloed that when she came in, she said, we're not doing that anymore. And she massively changed the business of HP. Well, if you can imagine having 87 presidents of their business unit, that's a lot of people who didn't want change. And Carly was able to push that through. So everyone says it can't be done. We can't have a 3-page tax code because there's too many interests. We can't repeal Obamacare. There's too many interests involved. No, you just need someone who's actually willing to cut through it and, frankly, to piss some people off.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I know. I guess we'll sort of end up on the last couple of questions, but you mentioned earlier about past engagements you had with India, where Carly visited the country. Could you either delve more into that or any other past engagements that she's had with India or Indian Americans?
Sure. I was mentioning a trip that she took in January of this year to India with Opportunity International. She was the chairman of that organization, and what Opportunity International does is provide microfinance loans predominantly to women in impoverished communities, because what Opportunity International has found is that when you provide that micro loan, whether it's $100, $150, it can make all the difference. Because when a woman is able to start a business, that migrates through her entire community. She's able to provide for her children, who are then able to help with the business. And it actually is the most effective way to move people out of poverty. And so something that I find very good about Carly is when you're having a meeting of your board for this organization, it's very easy to have that meeting in a posh location. They could have had it in Washington, D.C. or New York for that matter. And instead they went to India to have the meeting because they wanted to meet their clients. They wanted to talk to some of these women to see how they can be serving them better and what these loans do. Carly is sort of a get your hands in the problem, get dirty type of person when it comes to problem solving. And I think it's what makes her so effective. So she also, that being said, just happens to love the country and came back kind of raving about her trip. So I think it was 8 or 10 days in January, which for staff were like, you have to be in New Hampshire. And she was like, no, I have to go to India, actually.
That's great. Well, I think I have maybe one final one, unless anyone else has any questions. And maybe you do as part of your parting message to the Indian community right now, if you could give one, and also within that, let us know, let the Indian American community know how they can get more information on the Carly campaign and each specific issue that they might have, and also if they want to get involved in volunteering your campaign or otherwise supporting your campaign, the best ways to do that.
Absolutely, and thank you for sponsoring this and for all of the questions, which were interesting and thoughtful and fun. Carly's website is carlyforpresident.com. If you put in carlyforpresident.com/answers, we have what I think is a fairly cool feature where you can type in a question and look up a video of Carly answering the question. So if I haven't been able to answer your question, or if you just want to hear Carly answer it better than I can, which is every question, you can go to that site and type it in. You'll also be able to see her blueprint. She's listed out her 6 priorities for taking back our country, which if you attend any of her events, you'll see in the background. And obviously you can donate money on the site as well, which we really see this primary as a process of elimination before it's a process of selection. So it's important that we can go the long haul. We have a campaign built for that. We are lean, mean, and with a great ground game in many of these states. And if you do want any more information, my email is just Sarah with an H. The H is super important. Sarah@carlyfiorina.com. And feel free to email me any questions you have. I'm on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff too, so I'm highly available.
Excellent. I think we'll turn to Sanjay now, to the chairman and founder of USINPAC, to give a closing statement on from our end.
Thanks, Manish, and thanks to all the listeners and the viewers from around the country, the Indian American community. And thanks, Sarah, and thanks to Carly for doing this, because this becomes important, because when you see the debates and the interviews, those are 30-second sound bites. You really don't get specific into issues. And sometimes there are issues that are relatively maybe more specific to a specific group or a community, like you talked about Carly's work with microfinance and women, and that, believe me, is going to be something that a lot of people in our community are going to be interested in. You talked about maybe a strategic relationship in ISIS and things of that nature, which we really don't get to understand or listen in the multiple debates or other things that have been held. So we do this across the board with many candidates, and this is a chance for the Indian American community, which is really energized, as Manish said, in early states, etc. A lot of young people who want to volunteer. I think Sarah has given her contact information, and also in our community, people who want to support Carly, they can go online and contribute to her campaign. And again, Sarah, thanks for taking time. I know you've got a very busy schedule with the primaries, the caucuses coming up, and thanks for our entire team for putting this thing together. Again, good luck with the campaign. Thanks, Vijay. Thank you.
Thanks. I think with that we are closed. Thanks, Sarah. So I think we're offline now.
Yes.
So